Hi, this is David Miller, and I'm here with the third and final mini-lecture in a series on Philip Pullman's novel, The Subtle Knife. We're going to talk about choice and destiny. Near the end of The Subtle Knife, Will and Lyra pause to reflect on the role of chance in their adventures. If Will hadn't stopped to watch the cat that found the window to Cittagazze, if his cat Moxie hadn't come out of the bedroom to trip the government agent at the top of the staircase, if Lyra and Pan hadn't hidden in the wardrobe in the retiring room at Jordan College, none of this would have happened. Each of these chances might have gone a different way. Perhaps in another world, another Will had not seen the window in Sunderland Avenue and had wandered on, tired and lost, toward the Midlands until he was caught. And in another world, another Pantalamian had persuaded another Lyra not to stay in the retiring room, and another Lord Asriel had been poisoned. And another Roger had survived to play with Lyra forever on the roofs and in the alleys of another unchanging Oxford. Here we return to our point of departure, the possibility that God might create more worlds out of his dark materials and chaos, mentioned in passing in Paradise Lost. This sense of infinite possibilities branching off into infinite worlds derives from the many worlds hypothesis in quantum mechanics, and it finds its classic literary expression in Jorge Luis Borges' short story, The Garden of the Forking Paths. And if you don't know Borges, by the way, I strongly recommend that you dip into a collection of his short stories. There is nothing else like them. The premise of this theory is that every choice creates an alternative universe in which a different choice leads to different consequences. This sense of infinite possibility contrasts sharply with the notion of destiny, which implies that certain events are preordained. If Pullman's many worlds branch out from moments of choice, his plot nevertheless requires the constraining force of destiny expressed in prophecy. Lyra will be the new Eve. The plot of the trilogy also requires that different characters pursuing different lines of action converge, as they do in the final chapters of The Subtle Knife. The witches rescue Will and Lyra. Lee Scoresby finds Stanislaus Grumman. Grumman reveals that he is John Perry, and the alethiometer guides Will to a mountaintop rendezvous with his father. Even Mrs. Coulter joins the party. This pattern of convergence will be still more prominent in the final volume of the trilogy. From the point of view of plot and destiny, moments of choice, based on partial knowledge, turn out to be, in some sense, illusions. We saw last time how Will and Lyra only gradually discover that his quest to find his father and her quest to learn about Dust are not alternatives they must choose between. Dust tells Lyra to help Will, and when she chooses instead to pursue her own agenda, she is bitterly humiliated. Another moment of choice occurs when Ruta Skadi returns from her journey to the fortress of Lord Asriel and urges Seraphina to join his rebel army. "Not us," she said. "Our task now is to help Lyra, and her task is to guide Will to his father. You should fly back, agreed, but we must stay with Lyra." It's not that the choice doesn't matter, although the witches do not in fact succeed in protecting Lyra from Mrs. Coulter. But the alternatives they're choosing between, join with Lord Asriel or stay with Lyra, are only provisionally distinct. The Garden of Forking Paths is also a garden of converging paths. And so just as guiding Will to his father leads to the truth about Dust for Lyra, staying with Lyra will lead the witches to join Lord Asriel's rebel force. The same point holds for the conflicting allegiances of Lee Scoresby and John Perry. Lee wants the knife-bearer to protect Lyra and gives his life in exchange for the shaman's promise to give the bearer that mission. Lee set off to find the man he knows as Stanislaus Grumman because he's heard that Grumman knew of a mysterious object that can protect its owner, and he wants Lyra to have that protection. Grumman, a.k.a. Perry, wants the knife-bearer to join Lord Asriel. It's another version of the choices made by Serafina Pekkala and Ruta Skadi. "So this is my price for taking you into the other world, Dr. Grumman. Not gold, but that subtle knife. And I don't want it for myself. I want it for Lyra. You have to swear you'll get her under the protection of that object, and then I'll take you wherever you want to go." In Alamo Gulch, just before they part company, Lee repeats his demand, and Perry repeats his solemn promise. But when he finds Will on the mountaintop, the shaman breaks faith. "What must I do?" And then Stanislaus Grumman, Jopari, John Perry, hesitated. He was painfully aware of the oath he'd sworn to Lee Scoresby, and he hesitated before he broke it. But break it he did. "You must go to Lord Asriel," he said, "and tell him Stanislaus Grumman sent you, and that you have the one weapon he needs above all others." This making and breaking of the oath happens again. Weeping over his father's dead body, Will says, "Whatever you wanted me to do, I promise. I swear I'll do it. I'll fight. I'll be a warrior. I will. This knife, I'll take it to Lord Asriel wherever he is, and I'll help him fight that enemy. I'll do it." Earlier, Will had told Lyra what his mother said to him. "I always said to myself that when I grew up, I'd go and look for my father, and my mother used to tell me that I was going to take up my father's mantle. She used to say that to make me feel good. I didn't know what it meant, but it sounded important." Later, Lyra asks Will why he has to find his father, and he replies, "It's what I've always known. My mother said I'd take up my father's mantle. That's all I know." What does that mean, taking up his mantle? What's a mantle? A task, I suppose. Whatever he's been doing, I've got to carry on. That is what John Perry tells Will he must do, and what Will swears to do over his father's dead body. But it's not what Will chooses. When he discovers that Lyra is missing, he faces a choice between the mission his father left him and the one Lee Scoresby demanded as the price of taking the shaman to find Will. Like his father, Will breaks his oath, although he makes the opposite choice. The two dark figures of the Bene Elim had not moved, but they spoke. "You must come with us now. Lord Asriel needs you at once. The enemy's power is growing every minute. The shaman has told you what your task is. Follow us and help us win. Come with us. Come this way. Come now." Will looked from them to Lyra's rucksack and back again, and he didn't hear a word they said. Those are the final words of Volume 2. Will chooses Lyra. As for taking up his father's mantle, it turns out to mean something much simpler than carrying on his task. Beside the dead man lay his deerskin pack with the oilskin and the lantern and the little horn box of blood moss ointment. Will picked them up, and then he noticed his father's feather-trimmed cloak trailing behind his body on the ground, heavy and sodden, but warm. His father had no more use for it, and Will was shaking with cold. He unfastened the bronze buckle at the dead man's throat and swung the canvas pack over his shoulder before wrapping the cloak around himself. Sometimes a mantle is just a cloak. The point I'm making is that the alternatives all these characters choose between, caring for Lyra or delivering the knife to Lord Asriel, finally come down to the same thing. I don't want to anticipate too much, but when you get to the final battle scene in Volume 3, watch to see how the all-important weapon is used to secure a victory over the Authority. What you will learn then is anticipated by Ruta Skadi, who has overheard an ancient cliff-ghast telling its young what will happen in the great battle that is coming.
It would be a close fight, but Lord Asriel would win because he is passionate and daring, and he believes his cause is just. Except for one thing, children. He hasn't got Aesaheter. Without Aesaheter, he and all his forces will go down to defeat.
This is followed by the passage we've already looked at, in which Ruta urges Seraphina and the other witches to join her in following Asriel. She muses, then, on who this Aesaheter can be. She thinks it's a person. How have we not heard of him? And how can we urge him to join Lord Asriel? Maybe it's not a him, sister. We know as little as the young Cliffcast. Maybe the old grandfather was laughing at his ignorance. The word sounds as if it means God-destroyer. Did you know that? Then it might mean us after all, Seraphina Pekkala. Later, Seraphina offers another interpretation. But I'm thinking now that Lyra might be what you heard these guests speak of, this Aesaheter. Not the witches, not the angel beings, but that sleeping child, the final weapon in the war against authority. If that were so, if Lyra herself were the Aesaheter, then protecting her would be a way of taking the final weapon to Lord Asriel. It would mean that Seraphina is doing what Ruta Skadi urges her to do, even in her refusal. That Lee Scoresby is making John Perry swear an oath to do exactly what the shaman means to do, although neither of them knows it. And that Will doesn't break his oath after all in choosing to rescue Lyra. In short, it would mean that destiny is what each of them chooses without knowing it. There are a couple of topics that we might follow up on in discussion, if you like. What happens in Volume 2 with the children in charge motif? And what do we make of Lyra's terrifying dream at the start of Chapter 3 about opening the vacuum flask containing the skull of Stanislaus Grumman?